Hello everyone, my name is Neha Sukhija from the Department of Buddhist Studies of Delhi University. Today I am going to discuss about module number 5 of paper number 12, Philosophy of Buddhism 1. So this module is designed to make you familiar with the topic called Definition of Perception and Inference according to Dharmakirti, which is the most important in all philosophical topics. Perception and inference are considered to be a pramana. So pramana is a method of understanding the truth. In Indian philosophy, all philosophical schools, whether it is Buddhist or non-Buddhist, aim at searching truth and reality in their own and independent. So Pramana Shastra has played an important role in all the schools of Indian philosophy. Why? Because without evidence or proof, nothing can be given and accepted. So Pramana basically means the ability to generate valid knowledge, which means Prama. All Pramanas have specific way of expressing knowledge and each Pramana show a different type. Now in total there are 6 valid means of knowledge adopted by different schools of Indian philosophy. They are: the first one is perception, which means pratyaksha. The second one is inference, which means anumana. The third one is comparison, which means upamana. The fourth one is verbal testimony, which means shabda. The fifth one is postulation, which means arthapatti. The sixth one and the last one is non-apprehension, which means anuplabdhi in Sanskrit. So the Buddhists at the time of Dignaga adopt only 2 sources of knowledge, that is perception and inference. They reduce verbal testimony and reasoning by analogy or comparison into inference. So the difference lying between these 2 sources, which means perception and inference of valid knowledge, is in the Buddhist school a radical one, a real one and a transcendental one. Why? Because what is apprehended by senses is never liable to cognition by inference, and what is apprehended by inference can never be liable to cognition by the senses. For example, when a fire present in the perception and apprehended by sense of sight, it is a situation of sense perception for the realist. And when the same fire is beyond the perception and its existence apprehended only indirectly because same smoke is being perceived, fire is apprehended by inference. So let us discuss about perception. What is perception? Perception is also known as pratyaksha, is regarded to be a pramana, which means means of valid knowledge. The word pratyaksha composed of 2 words, that is prati, which means near, and aksha, which means eye. So pratyaksha indicated the knowledge occurring through the medium of eyes. Further, used an adjective, pratyaksha indicates that which is direct and immediate. As a noun, it indicates immediate knowledge. So perceptions describes knowledge generated from the direct contact of 5 senses with their object. Now, to know the position of Dharmakirti, it is important for you to know about the position of Dignaga, who was also a famous Buddhist philosopher. Dignaga, the father of medieval logic in India, was a great scholar of Indian philosophy. Vasubandhu, a great philosopher of Buddhist philosophy, was a teacher of Dignaga. Under his guidance, Dignaga got mastery of Vijnanavada theory and of logic. Thereafter, he wrote many books, out of which the one most important is Pramana Samuchaya. The work Pramana Samuchaya is about epistemology, logic and semantic. In the work Pramana Samuchaya, Dignaag has discussed the theory of knowledge in general. For him, the means of valid knowledge are two, that is, immediate, which means perception, and the next one is meditate, which means inference. Now, they are only two because the particular and the universal are only two aspects by which an object can be apprehended. Now, Dignaag defines perception as pratyaksham kalpana podam. I would like to repeat this again, pratyaksham kalpana podam, which in simple English can be translated as perception is free from conceptual construction. Now, according to Dignaag, a thing can be expressed by a word only when that thing connected with a name and other factors. Why? Because a thing is unable to express in itself. Conceptual construction, which means kalpana, is a process of connecting name, etc. with a thing and nothing else. So, kalpana, which means conceptual construction, is enough to exclude inference, which is invariably connected with conceptual construction. Kalpana is also sufficient to exclude errors and illusion from the class of perception. Why? Because error and illusion can be free from conceptual construction, but they are never agreeing with facts. So, perception as a source of valid knowledge presupposes as an essential requirement this agreement of fact with knowledge. But errors and illusion do not allow verification, which is the only important condition of agreement. So, one should not be confused the errors and illusion with valid knowledge. So, the definition of perception which is given by Dignaag is self-sufficient and self-verified. Now, let us discuss about the theory of perception by Dharamkirti. Dharamkirti, who was also a Buddhist philosopher, his famous work are Pramanavartika and the second one is Nyayabindu. According to him, all human actions relies for their achievement on true and valid knowledge. In his work Pramanavartika, he agrees with Dignaag in defining perception as free from conceptual construction. But in Nyayabindu, he joins the term abharanta, which means non-erroneous. In Nyayabindu, Dharamkirti explained perception as a presentation determined by the object and free from all ideal elements, which means kalpana. Now, it is called nirvikalpa or indeterminate stage of perception because savikalpa or determinate stage of perception includes the ideal elements. Therefore, according to Dharamkirti, perception is made up of apprehension of objects in its own special character, which means swalakshana, which have no similarity with other objects. So, it is totally free from any kind of connection with names and verbal expression. Why? Because such connection usually presupposes and it is also made by relational thought. The reality which is the object of perception, which is immediately shown to the mind and not some other ideas like generality, quality, action, substratum, name, which are not a component of presented sense data but are provided by imagination. In Pramanavartika, Dharamkirti makes a distinction between two things, that is Swalakshana and Samanalakshana. They are very important because an object is apprehended by these two. So, let us discuss what is Swalakshana. Swalakshana has potency to generate effects. It is unique, definite, specific and particular. It cannot be denoted by a word. And the last one characteristic of Swalakshana is it is cognizable without relying on other factors like verbal expression. Now, what is Samanya Lakshana? Samanya Lakshana do not have any potency to generate effects. It is not unique but universal. It can be denoted by a word, and it is not cognizable without relying on other factors like verbal expression. Now, according to Dharamkirti, perception can be divided into 4 classes. That is, number 1, sense perception, which means Indriya Vijnana in Sanskrit. The second one is mental perception, which in Sanskrit known as Manovijnana. The third one is self-cognition, which in Sanskrit known as Swa-samvedanam. And the last one is supersensuous perception of yogis. These are the 4 classes of perception. Now, let us discuss about definition of inference according to Dharamkirti. Inference can be characterized as knowledge of a thing through its mark. Another definition of inference is the knowledge of an infer. All things or all objects can be divided into 2. That is, present, which are known by perception, whereas the object that divided into absent are known by inference. Further, in the definition of inference, we can say inference knows the universal, whereas on the other hand, perception knows the object that is particular. Now, according to Dignaag and Dharamkirti, inference can be divided into 2 kinds. That is, number 1, inference for the purpose of one's own self, that is Swartha Anumana. And the second one is inference for the purpose of others, that is Pararth Anumana in Sanskrit. Now, the former, which is Swartha Anumana, is characterized as the deduction of the probandum, the inferable thesis, from the reason endowed with threefold characteristics, which are as follows. The number 1 characteristic is the reason or middle term must exist in the subject or the minor term. Number 2, the reason must exist merely in cases that are homologous. And number 3 is the reason must not exist in cases that are heterologous. Now, the inferable postulation is the subject of which the probandum is looked to be predicated. Also, the homologue is one that constantly has the probandum alongside the probans or reason. The heterologue is one which is the homologue's inverse, that is to say, which does not have the probandum and probans whenever. Now, presently, if a specific reason, which means probans or we can say hetu, is comprehended to have these triple characteristics, it will constantly and without any mistake lead to the information of the probandum. But what is the method for realizing that a specific probans would have the triple characteristics? Now, according to Dignaag, to answer this question, he says there are 3 reasons, which means hetu, that can fulfill these triple characteristics. They are a reason which is similar in a sense with the probandum, which means swabhava hetu. And the second one is which is an effect or impact. And the third one is non-perception. Now, according to Dharamkirti, the second kind of inference, which is known as Parartha Anumana, agrees with Swartha Anumana in all characteristics. The chief and the main difference in both these kinds of Anumana is Parartha Anumana, the inferential procedure must be placed verbally in premises. So, these are the two types of Anumana. Now, let us discuss about the subject matter of inference. What is subject matter of inference? The inference works with three terms, that is the subject, the predicate, which means the probandum, and the third one is the probens. So, there ought to be exist an invariable and unequivocal relation between the probens and the probandum. These are the main two conditions that are important for inference. Now, the question can arise, what are the objective and the correct matter of inference? This issue was attacked by Dignac in his work Pramana Samuchaya. He says there are few logicians who believe that the predicate, which is the probandum, is the object of inference, which is invariably joined with the probens. And others think that the association that is inferred and neither the subject nor the predicate on the grounds that they are known by other proof. But both these views are not correct according to Dignac. Why? Because if the probens is known not perpetually joined with the probandum, the latter is of now known at the time of association was apprehended. And in the event that it is a contended that the predicate was not known as identified with the subject, well, let then the subject along these lines qualified be viewed as probandum. The subject matter of inference is also cannot be association or connection. Why? Because it does not include the two terms, which means the probens and the probandum. Further, the relation cannot be expressed as the probandum in the syllogism, either by a name or through a case finishing. Also, the probens do not have any connection with relation. Why? Because the relation is implicitly contained in the probandum and need not to be expressed. Thus, it cannot be the subject, the predicate, and the relation that is inferred. However, it is the subject as qualified by the predicate that is inferred on the basis of invariable relation between the probens and the probandum observed somewhere else. Now, let us discuss about members of syllogism. Akshapada states that there are 5 members in a syllogism. They are, the first one is proposition, which in Sanskrit known as pratigya. The second one is reason, which in Sanskrit known as hetu. The third one is example, which in Sanskrit known as udharana. The fourth one is application, which in Sanskrit known as upanaya. And the fifth one is conclusion, which in Sanskrit known as nigmana. Now, these sentences are not separated, detached statement, but they are nearly woven together by a common necessity, and so they form a complex judgment. There was a various opinion considering the number of premises in syllogism. For example, Dharamkirti rejected the conclusion as a part of syllogism, whereas for Vatsyayana, the member of syllogism is 10 in number. Next, the Vedantis only accept the first three or the last three members of syllogism, and the modern Jainas accept that two propositions can form a syllogism, and Buddhists also agree with this view of modern Jainas that two propositions can form a syllogism, but they will differ on the form and the nature of the syllogism. Now let us discuss about these members of syllogism one by one. As I have said before, the first one is proposition. Proposition is the statement of the proposal that is to be proved. For example, word is impermanent. The second one is statement of reason comprises in adducing a fact capable of proving the probandum. For example, because word has a definite origin, that is hetu. The third one is example. Example is a familiar instance which is known to possess the probandum by probative reason, which it has just the same as the subject or the minor term. For example, a thing having a definite origin is seen to be impermanent. For example, a pot, or we can say a jug. This is udharana, or we can say example. The next is application of the reason by the subject after its probative worth has been confirmed in the case. For example, word has a definite origin as similar to pot or jug, which is also impermanent. Now this is upanaya. And the last one is conclusion. Conclusion is the restatement of the thesis along with the statement of reason connected to it. For example, therefore, word is impermanent because it has a definite origin. So, it is known as Nigmana. Now, Dharamkirti, who was the first scholar who questioned the cogency of the proposition, according to him, a proposition does not have any probative value. Why? Because the conclusion can be proved by the second and third, or we can say the third and fourth members, or we can say the fourth and the second being similar in import. For him, these two members are only important and the conclusion also takes after irresistibly from these two, and as being what is indicated require not be expressed in such a large number of words. So a statement is required when a truth or a fact cannot be known from something else, and it is not necessary here as the fact or truth can be known through these two members. Further, Dharamkirti says the conclusion also does not have any use. Why? Because as it repeats what is there already in the thesis. So this ought to be erased, or we can say removed. But even the thesis by itself without any reference to the conclusion is also useless, because the subject of dispute is an accepted datum and is known from the context. On the other hand, Vachaspati and Jayanta Bhatta state that the 5 member of syllogism is the most sound and correct medium of argument. Vachaspati contends that the arguer needs to state what is needed by opponent. Otherwise, his statement not receive any attentive consideration at the hands of the opponent. The proposition, for example, word is impermanent, is what is needed to be proved both by opponent and the arguer. And unless this is expressed, the reason in light of the fact that it is an product will be totally fulfill the intellectual demand. Thus, whatever is the product in time is impermanent and word is a project in time is totally perfect syllogism as it brings home by logical necessity the conclusion that word is impermanent and this ought to be fulfill intellectual demand. So the Buddhist in this manner reduces the syllogism into two members, that is the universal proposition with the example labeled on and the minor premise. In the Buddhist syllogism as discovered by Dignac and Dharamkirti, the mental factors were eliminated and the syllogism got a sensible shape. Now this is all about this topic, definition of perception and inference according to Dharamkirti. Now let us quickly revise what I have already said about this topic. So as I have said earlier that perception and inference are the two sources of knowledge that are adopted by Buddhist scholars. Dignac, who was a famous Buddhist philosopher and also known as father of medieval logic in India, defines perception as pratyaksham kalpana podam, which in simple English can be translated as perception is free from conceptual construction. According to Dignac, a thing can be expressed by a word only when that thing is connected with a name and other factors. Why? Because a thing is unable to express in itself. Conceptual construction, which is kalpana, is a process of connecting name, etc. with a word and nothing else. So kalpana is enough to exclude inference, which is invariably connected with conceptual construction. Kalpana is also sufficient to exclude errors and illusion from the class of perception. Errors and illusion can be free from conceptual construction, which means kalpana, but they are never agreeing with facts. Now, perception as a source of valid knowledge presupposes as an essential requirement this agreement of fact with knowledge. But errors and illusion do not allow verification, which is the only important condition of agreement. So, we should not be confused the errors and illusion with valid knowledge. So, this definition that is given by Dignac, that is pratyaksham kalpana podam, is self-verified and self-sufficient. Now Dharamkirti, who was also great Buddhist philosopher, agreeing with Dignac in his work Pramanavartika that perception is free from conceptual construction. But in Nyayabindu, he joins the term abharanta, which means non-erroneous, to this definition. In Nyayabindu, Dharamkirti explains perception as a presentation determined by the object and free from all ideal elements, which means kalpana. It is called nirvikalpa or indeterminate stage of perception. Why? Because savikalpa or determinate stage of perception includes the ideal elements. Therefore, according to Dharamkirti, perception is made up of apprehension of objects in its own special character, that is to say swalakshana, which have no similarity with other objects. So, it is totally free from any kind of connection with names and verbal expression, because such connection usually presupposes and it is also made by inferential relational thought. So the reality, which is the object of perception, which is immediately showed to the mind and not some other ideas like generality, quality, substratum, name which are not a component of presented sense data but are provided by imagination. In Pramanavartika, as I have said earlier, Dharamkirti makes a distinction between Swalakshana and Samanya Lakshana because these are the two important aspects by which an object can be apprehended. Swalakshana has potency to generate effects, whereas Samanya Lakshana do not have any potency to generate effect. Swalakshana is unique, particular, whereas Samanya Lakshana is not unique but universal. Swalakshana cannot be denoted by a word, whereas Samanya Lakshana can be denoted by a word. And the last characteristic of Swalakshana and Samanya Lakshana is Swalakshana is cognizable without relying on other factors like verbal expression, whereas Samanya Lakshana is not cognizable without relying on other factors like verbal expression. So, these are the two aspects which an object can be apprehended. So, this is the definition of perception. Now, what is inference? Inference is a knowledge through its mark. Inference can be defined as that inference is a cognition of an object through its mark. It has two kinds. The first one is Swartha Anumana for the purpose of own self, and the next one is Parartha Anumana for the purpose of others. So that's all about this topic, definition of perception and inference according to Dharamkirti. That's all. Thank you.